Picture it. Europe 1490s, a kingdom hungry for purpose and profit. The Spanish crown drafts a divine business plan.
It's about the conquest of the New World by Spain.
The church signs on as a moral sponsor. The motto? Gold, glory, and God.
Wealth was part of it, wealth in the sense of gaining control over land, but also ideology, and the ideology in particular was one of religious warfare.
Across cathedrals and courtrooms, the crown's mission spreads like the gospel. Expand the realm, enlighten the heathen, and send a cut to Madrid.
There were conquistadores who certainly wanted money, but they really believed, just as it happened in the Crusades, they were bringing light to the people.
With Spain's favorite multi-tool, the humble seashell, the crown launched the world's first faith-based multinational. One dip for holy water, another for holy treasure.
Religion was a means of empire building for the Spanish Empire. It was the only part of indigenous culture that the rulers were really keen to change.
Pop quiz. If faith built empires, what did empires build faith in?
Progress.
The innocence of youth. Welcome to Lesson 3, Conquest and Conversion. Reality check. The Spanish Empire was one of history's biggest world shapers. It joined faith to force and turned the Americas into the epicenter of a new global economy. If you're wondering why the modern world looks the way it does, start here. Before the sword came the signature. In 1513, the Spanish crown issued the requerimiento, a legal proclamation meant to justify conquest.
They would read a document saying their intentions and demanding that people cede their rights to the Spanish kingdom.
It offered peace and protection if indigenous communities accepted Christianity and the authority of the crown. Refuse and you were said to authorize war, enslavement, and dispossession.
Pizarro and his people, the priest, read this to people who didn't understand a word of Spanish. So it often had a certain absurdity to it, but it was a ritual to begin some sort of conquest.
The crown of Spain signed contracts with these individuals, signed contracts with Columbus, with Cortez, with Pizarro, who were kind of entrepreneurs, raiders, who were of commoners' origins.
And those guys, you have to understand, they were desperados. They were all social outsiders. They all came from the dregs of society. And their ambition was to ascend, to escape from the socially restrictive acceptance world of home.
When Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico in 1519, he brought ambition that outweighed his resources. A few hundred soldiers, a handful of horses, and a flag of royal sanction. What he lacked in numbers, he gained in alliances.
The Spanish moved from Veracruz up towards Tenochtitlan, what is today Mexico City, and they recruited. Many of these civilizations despised the Aztecs.
Ultimately, a small number of people managed to conquer these great empires, in part also because both the Aztec Empire and the Inca Empire were heavily divided both within the ruling elites, but also because the Aztecs and the Incas had only recently conquered subject peoples, and these peoples were willing to cooperate with the Spaniards against their new imperial masters.
Spanish steel and gunpowder didn't conquer alone. They amplified an existing rebellion.
Wait, so technically the Aztecs were defeated by other indigenous groups?
Ooh, history loves a single hero. Reality prefers a coalition. Moctezuma II sent gifts of gold, hoping to negotiate peace.
He thought he would satisfy them, maybe buy them off. Moctezuma underestimated the Spanish.
gold to the Spanish crown only confirmed prophecy. It didn't cool ambition, it ignited it.
And to send gold as a possible bribe or a peaceful gesture was the worst thing they could have done, because there are many, many sayings in the archives about how the Spanish lust for gold.
Diplomacy quickly collapses into war. By 1521, the indigenous Spanish coalition advances on Tenochtitlan, a city built on water and sustained by causeways, a marvel turned battlefield. The siege drags on for months. Famine spreads, canals fill with debris, and resistance hardens.
Part of it was microbes, particularly smallpox, but other diseases as well, like influenza, which the native people had no immunity to because they'd had no previous exposure.
At one point, Aztec forces capture Cortés himself, a brief reversal in a brutal campaign. With the combined weight of foreign weapons, local alliances, and relentless tactics pushes the balance back toward the crown's conquest. By August 13th, 1521, after nearly 3 months of fighting, Tenochtitlan falls. Chroniclers describe a city leveled, not a single stone left standing. Contemporary estimates suggest tens of thousands of indigenous deaths against roughly 100 Spanish casualties. Within weeks, Cortés orders construction of Mexico City atop the ruins, turning the former Aztec capital into the new administrative center of the Spanish crown. If Cortés staged conquest as theater, Pizarro turned it into an ambush in costume.
Cortés and Pizarro master political spectacle.
The mind-boggling moment, the Pizarro capture of Cajamarca in 1532, it's really a key moment in global history. The world changed that day, I think quite literally, although at that moment we wouldn't have known.
In 1532, Pizarro invites the Inca Emperor Atahualpa to what's billed as a friendly meeting. The emperor agrees and allows him in.
He's got tens of thousands, some accounts say hundreds of thousands of very well-trained Inca soldiers, and he invites Pizarro into the town of Cajamarca, into this enclosure patio structure, almost a classic medieval city, if you will.
The audience, fewer than 200 Spaniards, hiding muskets behind the curtains. A friar steps forward, reciting a demand for submission to the crown and the cross, a ceremony scripted more for justification than dialogue. Atahualpa refuses. The curtain falls, and cannons fire.
The Inca soldiers are outside. They cannot get into town quick enough. The Spanish, who are brilliant at using their formation, using advantage of their horses, their dogs, above all their firearms, their cannons, which they treated with great care and, took up the Andes.
By the end of the scene, over 1,000 of Inca attendants are dead. Atahualpa is captured and forced into baptism, not by faith, but by fear.
Then we have weeks of negotiations, which are just very painful.
He offers a ransom beyond imagination.
Atahualpa calls to bring all the gold and silver to fill up a room. There's a room you can visit in Cajamarca. There's a mark, and they fill this with gold and silver.
But freedom isn't part of the contract. Pizarro takes the gold, then orders Atahualpa's execution.
Wait, so they staged a friendly meeting, demanded conversion, took his gold, and then killed him anyway?
Correct. A public relations miracle. They conquered, converted, and still called it consent.
That's impressive in a horrifying way.
Welcome to the original masterclass in moral spin. From the crown's perspective, conquest didn't just redraw borders. It rebuilt them in its image.
People don't realize that the Spanish monarchy created literally thousands of hospitals, which served the elites by looking after their workers and peasants and slaves, and the monarchy paid the cost of that.
The Incas had a work program where the empire guaranteed you food, distributed things, made sure that lowlands got highland product.
A shared language, Spanish, spread across the continent, eventually linking millions under a single tongue, one of the widest cultural spheres on Earth today. Across the Atlantic, exchange moved in every direction. Wheat, horses, and citrus one way, maize, tomatoes, and chocolate the other.
These early empires of the 1500s and 1600s of the Iberian empires, namely Portuguese and Spanish, definitely engineered modernity in more ways than one. Modernity as globalization, modernity as connectivity, modernity as trade, global trade that is.
But if everything we eat, speak, and build comes from it, can we ever separate what was taken from what was made?
That's the question every empire leaves behind when the ruins start to look like home. Conquest graduates from chaos to paperwork. No more ad hoc plunder. This version comes with a royal seal. The Spanish crown introduces the encomienda system.
Encomiendas are these systems in which entire communities are given to these conquistador lords for them to pay tribute to these conquistador lords.
Their duties, at least on paper, were clear. Protect the people, instruct them in faith, and manage their labor for the crown. In practice, protection looked a lot like coercion.
It was a game almost to justify conquering and becoming very, very rich potentially, or bringing honor to their family.
Those entrusted paid tribute in gold, food, and labor, often under impossible quotas. Mines filled faster than promises, and faith became the fine print of empire.
The mines of Potosí or the mines of Mexico that created the wealth of the Indies were by and large the result of mobilization of free paid labor, not encomiendas and not rotational labor, mitas. There is forced rotational labor.
Enter Bartolomé de las Casas, a Spanish friar who witnessed the system up close and called it what it was.
Some Spanish commentators in the 16th century, like the Casas, were very angry about the treatment of local society, and they bitterly denounced it.
In 1542, he publishes a short account of the destruction of the Indies, a moral audit of empire, documenting massacres, forced labor, and the collapse of entire communities under the weight of civilization.
This certainly affected attitudes in metropolitan Spain, because the argument among reformers was that the Spaniards should treat the local people not as slaves, but as peasants or subjects.
Las Casas turned to the crown, urging King Charles V to act. In 1542, the monarch issued the new laws of the Indies, banning the enslavement of indigenous people and limiting the inheritance of encomiendas, an early attempt to curb abuses written into law.
The reality was that it was very hard to implement that, and that often on the ground in the Spanish colonies, the situation was much harsher.
The colonial response? What we might call a legal jailbreak. Revolts break out, petitions flood Madrid, and officials on the ground invent new titles to mask old practices. Missions become engines of empire. Part chapel, part classroom, part clock. Bells mark the rhythm of prayer, labor, and rest. In the crown's view, they brought order where none existed.
It was missionaries who formed the kind of spiritual garrisons of the frontier. They didn't have armies, they didn't have weapons, but they created a pretty secure and impermeable frontier.
In reality, they built a new kind of town, one where salvation shared walls with supervision. Schools taught literacy, farming, and European music, giving rise to hybrid cultures. Indigenous artisans, choirs, and architects blending old worlds with new forms.
Indigenous people typically loved Spanish music. Some of the best composers of Spanish-style music in the 16th century were Native Americans in Mexico.
I think, as is entirely as to be expected, some of the mission settlements were quite benign, some less so.
Indigenous groups were saying, no, they controlled us. They broke us from they separated us from our language. They separated families. They gave us Christian names. This was a form of conquest.
By the late 1500s, Spanish missions stretched from Florida and New Mexico, eventually reaching California by 1769. Forming a chain of faith, labor, and empire along the edges of the New World.
It's strange. The missions built progress, but only by dismantling the people who built the land.
That's the paradox of empire. Progress that cost you your past. In 1562, Franciscan friar Diego de Landa discovers that some Maya converts in Mani, Yucatan are still practicing traditional rites. His response becomes one of history's most infamous acts of cultural destruction, an auto de fe. Over several days, he orders the burning of 27 Maya codices, handmade records of astronomy, history, and ritual, and the destruction of more than 5,000 sacred objects. Landa later wrote, "We found a large number of books, and as they contained nothing but superstitions and lies of the devil, we burned them all." The result? Entire libraries reduced to ash. Of the hundreds that once existed, estimates are only 3 or 4 Maya codices survive today.
You could argue in modern terms it's imposing what now we would call cultural amnesia, and that is definitely the case in religious terms.
This one moment was just a desperate, horrible cultural genocide, if you will, trying to literally getting rid of the key book of memory for a vast civilization.
What began with aqueducts and armies evolved into infrastructure and influence. Pipelines of power disguised as progress.
The worst thing you can do if you want to keep your empire going is to start a war. You know, the British, French, Spanish, Portuguese empires, all the early empires collapsed in wars. Nowadays, if you really want to keep an empire going, look at the 2 great modern examples of successful empire. And those are China and the United States.
China and the United States should be partners and friends. This is what history has taught us.
Today, nations don't cut rivers, they cut routes, supply chains, sanctions, and blockades.
100% tariff on all chips and semiconductors coming into the United States.
Governments restrict access to critical technologies. Semiconductors, rare earth minerals, lithium, cobalt, and advanced manufacturing tools. These controls don't need to declare war. They define dependency. In 2023, the US, Japan, and the Netherlands limited the export of advanced chip-making equipment. Not to cripple, but to control who can compute the future. At the same time, rare earth magnets, an estimate of 90% of which are refined in a handful of nations, remind the world that resource power never really ended, it just got digitized.
You're saying no one needs armies anymore, just patents and pipelines?
Correct. Power isn't who invades, it's who supplies.
So empire became logistics.
And influence became inventory management.
As it were, different systems of economic control or exploitation of labor, and that one could argue that forms of work today and new technologies.
In the colonial era, tribute flowed upward from colony to crown. Now it flows outward from debtor to creditor.
People often think that managing an empire is all about maximizing resources. But actually, most empires don't work like that. They don't tend to manage resources directly. They tax and extract tribute from the productivity of others, usually of private enterprises.
Critics describe sovereign debt as a quieter chain, repayments that keep nations solvent but dependent. Take Ghana, which defaulted on its external debt in 2022 after years of structural loans. Or Zambia, whose debt repayments were already absorbing such a large share of the budget that it left limited fiscal space for health and other essential services. Critics argue such cycles mirror the old colonial logic. Wealth flows north, risk stays south. Supporters counter that these loans, often backed by the IMF or World Bank, can stabilize currencies and attract investment if reforms take root. In Pakistan, IMF bailouts have repeatedly restored fiscal order, but at the cost of subsidy cuts that raise energy and food prices. In Argentina, a $44 billion IMF loan remains both lifeline and leash, sparking protests over austerity.
Wait, if debt replaced tribute, does that mean independence was just deferred payment?
Freedom's an expensive subscription model. Cancel anytime and lose your credit line. Labor quotas didn't disappear, they just migrated. From colonial plantations to global production lines, from rubber trees to microchips, extraction still runs on human hands.
What you see over the course of years in the Indies is the origins of capitalism. Free labor, salary labor of individuals that are detached from their communities and have no property except their labor.
Reports find indigenous Peruvians, especially in remote mining fronts, at higher risk of coercion and trafficking. Field studies flag debt bondage and false recruitment in illegal camps, while Peru's anti-trafficking plan and partnership programs work to counter those risks. The ILO estimates nearly 28 million people remain trapped in forced labor, much of it hidden deep in supply chains. A 2024 Human Rights Watch investigation linked aluminum for electric vehicles to alleged forced labor among Turkic minorities in Xinjiang. Governments and companies say they're reforming, tightening audits, enforcing due diligence, and tracing raw materials. But complex chains make accountability a maze. The colonial bonfires burned books. Today, the fires are invisible. Algorithms, data sets, and digital platforms quietly ingest, repurpose, and often overwrite indigenous knowledge without consent, context, or compensation.
That attack on local culture includes the destruction of local archival material, sort of local knowledge systems.
Some scholars are now naming this phenomenon algorithmic colonialism, when indigenous knowledge is extracted, indexed, and repackaged by data systems that mistake harvesting for preservation. Facial recognition systems misclassify indigenous faces, while translation tools flatten sacred languages into syntax. But resistance exists. Across the world, indigenous technologists are building new firewalls under the banner of indigenous data sovereignty, reclaiming ownership of story, sound, and code. Because the lesson still stands. If you don't control how you're seen, you risk disappearing. This time, not in flames, but in files. Empires never die. They evolve. They move from maps to markets, from weapons to words, from words to code. Every age writes its conquest in a different language, and every update leaves the same glitch. The human need to remember, to resist, to rewrite the script in their own voice. Because history doesn't just live in books or borders. It lives in stories, in whose truth gets told and whose gets erased.
A lesson is the story. Tell a good story. Because the story, as it spreads, becomes memory and becomes history.
Because even after 500 years of conquest, someone, somewhere, is still speaking the unsanctioned version. And that is the one history can't overwrite. You think you can answer the question now? If faith built empires, what did empires build faith in?
A narrative.
A+. You've passed lesson 3 and mastered selective morality, labor outsourcing, and historical spin. You are now qualified to run a colony. or a corporation. But remember, power lives in the story we repeat, and stories die the moment we stop repeating them.